some of the things around determinants of adoption is what I want to talk to you next, which is the flow of capital to help in that adoption, the development of talent to ensure that adoption happens, and possibly research, country-specific, sector-specific research that need to happen to make sure that whatever general innovation is happening can be adapted to that particular sector or country's context, right? In similar ways, how we saw the internet play out, right? Venture capital, PE firms went out and supported a lot of entrepreneurs around the world to innovate and adapt models that might have developed in the US or China or wherever else at the beginning. But then you found the adoption then spread. Similarly, on the infrastructure side, large telecom companies went out and spread the internet infrastructure. So I want to ask you your views and thoughts on how you expect AI adoption to play out and where the flows of capital, research, talent, how those are likely to play out.
Yeah. I think Mark Andreessen and others have talked about this, but I think one thing that is favorable in this regard is there's a certain gravity to techno-economic systems, which to say they're often invented with very precious, very kind of apex capabilities at very high cost that hint at the future direction of a technology, but that the entire the gravitational pull for people who develop those technologies is to democratize them and distribute them as widely as possible. There's a very strong economic impetus to expand the addressable market of what you've invented. And even while in the early going, it may have been targeted to early adopters or, apex consumers of technology, the system encourages a democratic kind of egalitarian world. And that's why you see, early technologies come down in cost and go up that curve of cost and capability. So given that history, I think we should, history would dictate that the purveyors and developers of this technology will have a very strong economic impulse to make this as affordable and prolific as they can, and to reduce the price points of it such that the broadest possible audience in the world can get access, and therefore in the aggregate, they can maximize profit under a much bigger curve. So, hopefully things will play out in that regard here. This is a little bit different in some ways, just as we've talked about the massive capital requirements here, and what unique motivations or unique phenomenon that will create for the world in terms of how to get payback from that capital. Again, I think the answer is broad proliferation, broad access, but we also have to rely on the companion phenomenon of broadband access, devices, internet access, reaching the totality of humanity. That, I think we will solve the abundance of this form of machine intelligence for the world. But the predicate for that is that they have online access, they have devices, they have the ability to get access to this intelligence. And if we can't solve that, this will be a world is not flat, kind of bumpy phenomenon. My hope is that this is a capability that ultimately the entirety of humankind will get access to in one way, shape, or form.
I worry about, what I've called in my book, the second great divergence, right? That's not a term I've invented, others have used it, but I found it very pertinent as a mental framework to keep in mind that, we've talked about the Industrial Revolution and the parallels AI as possibly with that revolution. And one of the things that revolution leads to is a great divergence between nations, right? Western European and the US being on one side, seeing a massive increase in their GDP and GDP per capita, and then a whole set of other countries that don't see that kind of growth, and leads to a great divergence, which to date exists, right? In many ways, 200, 300 years later, and at the same time, within countries as well. But within countries, you lead into a great sense of divergence, and that then, of course, has its own implications of, sometimes populist, socialist, labor type movements, right? That say that, listen, we cannot tolerate such a great divergence.
Totally. By the way, this is just yet another area in which I think the world has a lot to learn from India. If you think about the gains that India's made from, again, the digital stack, creating a platform upon which entrepreneurs can build businesses, the innovation around expanding broadband and online access, the driving down of costs of devices, the number of Indian citizens who now have access to sophisticated technology and how that's helped transform your economy. Like, I think that's an inspiration for this function around the rest of the world. And hopefully others are taking notes from the benefits that have accrued to your nation in this regard.
No, definitely. And I think that's a piece that's very important that I try and highlight as well, which is that broader access, that broader sort of level playing field, this idea of data commons, digital commons that then entrepreneurs can build on top of is a philosophy that I think can help propagate AI technology also more broadly.
Yep. But just maybe to touch on your point, which is I do think one of the threats for pockets of humanity in this is that nation states are threatened by the power of this capability, the emergent quality of this capability, and that they want to restrain their citizens from access to this kind of free-form, accessible intelligence. That could really retard development in countries that don't make this available to their citizenry, and do it in a way that, again, affordable, prolific, broad, the way that India has. So that is an area where you could see a break here, a geopolitical break between countries that encourage that kind of access to, kind of omnipresent intelligence in the form of these algorithms versus those who are threatened by it and foreclose it to their citizenry.
So that's right. And I think much like we talk about in the context of individuals, early adopters, right, in terms of countries that are early adopters of this technology, I draw parallels with, countries that were early industrializers, right? I think the benefits will accrue, I think, for a long time and for large swaths of the population if you are early adopters of this technology, as opposed to being, tech pessimists and retarding the
exactly
path. No, I agree with you.